Jesse,
And I'm Adam.
and we are from, thanks. We're from a project within Google called Project Magenta. It's part of the machine learning group within Google. And we work specifically on, it's an open source research project. So we do cutting edge machine learning research, but we're really interested in the role that machine learning can play for creative technologies and for artists and musicians. So everything we do, we put out in open source, and we also focus on building tools for developers and for artists so that they can actually actively explore using AI and machine learning in the creative process. And so if you're interested more in the project, just a real quick plug, you can go to g.co/magenta. If you're more on the research side, you can find all sorts of research papers and data sets. If you're a musician, there's a lot of integrated tools you can try. And we also have JavaScript and other libraries to use for coders. And so I'm going to pass it over to Adam, who's going to talk about what this means more in practice.
Yeah, so let's look at one concrete example of the type of work we do. This is a project that we released last week called Groove. And it actually started with just inviting and actually hiring drummers, professional drummers, to come into the office. We recorded them playing on an electronic drum kit that allowed us to capture a symbolic representation of their performances. And then we trained machine learning models to do various tasks with this data that we thought could be interesting to use in a creative context. So I'll get into some of those tasks in just a moment, but first I just want to kind of go through how we actually seed this stuff into the world. So first, we always, we're a research group, so we write an academic paper, we submit it to a machine learning conference. We also release the data set so that other researchers can take that and either reproduce our results or even hopefully expand on it and improve upon it. But we also always put our stuff into open source. So we want coders to have access to this technology as well. So we'll release a TensorFlow implementation of our models. We also typically, and in this case, we re-implemented in TensorFlow.js. And this is just a really useful technology for building interfaces and applications on top of these methods. It makes it really easy to do that when you put it into JavaScript. And then lastly, in this case, we put the data set into TensorFlow datasets, which is just like a single line API for accessing that data set. So you can train new models, or you can use it for whatever purpose you'd like. And then finally, we typically build some sort of tools for either musicians or artists or whatever types of creators we're targeting. And in this case, we took our JavaScript implementation and we built some plugins called Magenta Studio for Ableton Live. So if you're not familiar with Ableton Live, it's a professional software package that people use to produce music or to compose music. And these plugins add new functionality to that library that didn't exist before. So I want to focus in on Drumify, which is one of the two plugins that we built from the models we made with our Groove data set. And what this plugin does is it actually lets you take any sort of rhythmic music and turn it into a drum beat, or to create a drum beat that kind of accompanies it well. So imagine you're a producer, you're starting a new song, and you have a bass line that you like a lot, but you maybe either don't have access to a drum kit, or you're not a talented or skillful drummer yourself. You can use the Drumify plugin to take that bass line and create an accompanying drum beat to kind of continue your compositional process. So let's just hear a quick example of this in practice. So first, you're going to hear a bass line that somebody made. So now we're going to take that and we're going to turn it into a drum beat to accompany with Drumify. So that was just using the bass line, the onsets of the bass notes, extracting that rhythm, and then with just a few clicks, you can create a drum beat to go along with that. So that's just one example of the types of things we're working on. There's a lot more at g.co/magenta. We have a lot more projects. Everything is free, open source, easy to use, so please check that out if you're interested. But now I want to transition over and focus a bit on some of the creators that have actually started using this technology in their artistic practice. So specifically, we have two musicians here today that we're really excited about. The first is Claire Evans. So she's 1/3 of the band Yacht. She's also an artist in her own right and a very accomplished author. Her book is called Broadband: The Untold Story of the Women Who Made the Internet. And I highly recommend this book. Yeah. I consider it to be required reading, so definitely check that out. But today she's not going to be talking about that. She's going to be talking about how her band has recently adopted some of these machine learning technologies in their process, and kind of we can see where that's taken them as a band. So let's invite Claire up to the stage. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Claire, obviously, and I'm here as a representative of my band. Yacht, we're playing tonight on the main stage, so if you like this, or you find this interesting, we're going to be playing a lot of the songs that I'm talking about here today on the main stage. So for anyone who isn't familiar with Yacht, I'm just going to start this with like a quick sort of preface so you get a sense of who we are and where we're coming from when I start talking about how we get into machine learning. So Yacht was founded in 2002 by my partner, Jonna Bechtold, who's sitting over there. It was named after this kind of decrepit-looking sign that he saw on the street in Portland, Oregon. Yacht, Young Americans Challenging High Technology. We have no idea what this business did. It is actually, frankly, ungoogleable. Some things are. We've tried to find out many times over the years. But even though we've had a lot of different incarnations of the band, it's been 17 years of making music, we've kept this acronym because it kind of articulates something really core about who we are, which is that we want to stay in constant, engaged dialogue with technology. I mean, obviously we're not Luddites, because I'm here, and we're not particularly adversarial either. It's just challenging in the sense that we want to remain engaged always, and we always want to be aware of the kind of push and pull between using tools and having our work be affected by the tools that we use, the tools shaping our work. I want to say that I'm not a coder, like, at all. I only understood like 20% of what Adam and Jesse were even saying just now, and we've been working with them for 3 years. So our relationship to technology in the context of art making has always been from the outside looking in. And we're interested in tools, in getting access to interesting tools, and then in finding our own novel ways of using those tools, ways that are kind of sideways. We like to force creative applications of non-creative technologies, both consumer-facing and non-consumer-facing, just to see what we can do with them and see how they can be applied to our historically pretty DIY punk rock operation. If we have one basic prime directive that dominates what we do, it's to do as much as possible with as little as possible, which is something that we picked up from reading a lot of Buckminster Fuller and drawing the requisite analogies to our own background in decentralized punk rock communities in the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to tell you about a couple projects we've done to give you a sense of who we are. So a couple years ago, we revealed new album cover artwork exclusively via fax. We did that by building a web application that identified nearby fax machines to our fans, like at FedEx or UPS or like their parents' offices, and sent the artwork directly to them with an additioned cover letter. A fax machine transmits information through sound, which is basically what music does, and we liked the idea of activating a dormant technology or a latent technology as a way of showing what creative possibilities exist at the brink of obsolescence. And on that tip, we recently wrapped a 4-year project to reactivate a really dormant piece of technology in downtown Los Angeles, a public artwork from 1975 called the Triforium, which was originally designed as the world's first polyphenoptic instrument, so an instrument that could synchronize light and sound into an original new art form. The computer system that it was built with in 1975 obviously was not up to snuff, so it had been broken for a very long time. But we got some money, and we got an interdisciplinary team together and managed to bring the lights back using a custom-built LED installation. And we managed to salvage the original 8-bit paper tape code that ran the original computer system so that it could be responsive to live musical input once again. So again, this is a cohabitation of old and new technologies. And we love making use of things that are just waiting to be re-explored and reimagined. And again, with as little resources as possible. We became really interested in machine learning about 4 years ago because we felt like it was maybe the next step for us. We were interested both in the reflective qualities of machine learning, like the way that it would help us to understand ourselves, and the generative qualities of machine learning, the ways that it would help us to make something entirely new. So I'm speaking to you now from basically the tail end of a years-long project of trying to find a machine learning-driven compositional process that would work for our purposes, that would allow us to make music that wasn't just passable as human being generated music, but as something genuinely interesting and meaningful and in line with our back catalog of recordings and releases. So we didn't just want to make a record using machine learning, we wanted to make a Yacht record using machine learning, and that's a much different proposition. I'll get into the nitty-gritty because I figure that's the scene. This is basically what we used to make our record. We experimented with a bunch of different strategies, but we found that the best compositional tool for us was Magenta's music VAE model, which is a latent space interpolation model that allowed us to find, essentially, I know this isn't the technical way of explaining it, but it allowed us to find melodies hidden in between songs from our own back catalog. And this is what the user-facing side of that model looked like when we were initially recording the record last May. It's a collab notebook, so not exactly the kind of thing musicians are used to bringing into the studio. And unfortunately, we started doing this before Magenta made user-friendly Ableton Live plugins for musicians, but whatever, it gives us street cred, so I'm okay with it. So in order to work this way, to bring something like a collab notebook into the studio, we had to do a lot of prep work. So first, we manually annotated our entire back catalog of music, that's 82 songs, into MIDI. And then we broke out all of the bass lines, vocal melodies, keyboard lines, drum parts, into 4-bar loops. Then we ran pairs of those loops through the collab notebook at different temperatures, sometimes dozens, if not hundreds of times, in order to generate this massive body of melodic information that we could then use as sort of source material for creating new songs. When we had this massive amount of musical information, that's when the human being process began. This is when we started manually culling through all of this MIDI data, trying to find interesting moments, things that spoke to us, things that felt interesting, things that we wanted to explore further. As some of you might know, using machine learning to make a song with structure, with a beginning, middle, and end, with a verse, chorus, verse, is a little bit still out of our reach. But that's a good thing, because the melody was the model's job, but the arrangement and the performance was entirely our job. So to demonstrate what I mean a little bit more concretely, let's focus on just a single melody from a single song. So I'm going to play you a melody that came straight out of the music VAE model. It was one of several different MIDI sequences generated by an interpolation between 2 different Yacht songs, one called Hologram and one that has a swear word in the title, so I feel like I probably shouldn't say it out loud. I want to fuck you till I'm dead. Okay, so this particular melody for us was exceptionally aesthetically interesting, but like every melody generated by the music VAE model, it's just an endless sequence of notes that goes on until it stops, right? It's not exactly pop material. So this is where the rules come in, and I don't mean like technical rules, I mean human rules, working rules for our specific process. We have always thrived, like many artists, I believe, under self-imposed constraints. Because when you sit down to write a pop song about anything in the world, it's overwhelming. But if you have some boundaries in place, you can begin to think about it more concretely. So for us, we decided that every single song that we were going to create with this process had to be interpolated from existing melodies from our back catalog. We hoped that this would result in songs that had that kind of indefinable Yacht feeling, which we don't know how to quantify, and I don't think the model can either. But that's what we decided would be our parameters. We decided also that we could not add any notes, we could not add any harmonies, we could not jam or improvise or otherwise interpret or essentially be creative in any way. There was no additive alteration, only subtractive or transpositional changes. So we could assign any melody to any instrument. So that melody we just heard could have been a keyboard line, could have been a bass line, could have been a guitar line, could have been a vocal melody. That was our decision to make. We could transpose melodies to our working key, and we could structure and cut up and collage as much as we wanted. Now let's talk about lyrics, another important element of any song. So for this project, we collaborated with a different creative technologist, Ross Goodwin, who was a free agent when we started working with him. He's now with Google's Artists and Machine Intelligence group, which is something that happened kind of a lot during our process. We worked with Ross to create a lyrics model with sort of the same ethos as our melodic model. So we wanted to have it be kind of reflective of our own inspiration, our own background, our own history, our own back catalog. So the model that we built with Ross was trained on a corpus of 20 megabytes of text. So that's about 500,000 pages or approximately 2 million words. And These are all from bands that we consider to be our influences, music we grew up listening to, music our parents listened to, our own music, our friends and collaborators and peers. We saw this as an opportunity to kind of teach the machine our values, our history, our community, and where we come from as artists. The end result was this. So this is one instance, one block of output from the lyrics model that Ross created with us, which we printed out on a single sheet of dot matrix printer paper, because did you know they still make dot matrix printers, and you can buy them on Amazon, and we wanted to visualize it as something really physical. So we had this massive block of text, one continuous sheet, that we brought into the studio with us, and I literally sat down on the studio floor highlighting interesting passages. It's interesting because it contains a range of low to high temperature material. So the low temperature stuff, because it's taking less risks, is much more repetitive, much more simplistic. It's kind of the punk rock lyrics engine. It taps into the more elemental things in songs. So there's entire pages and pages and pages of repetitive phrases like, I want your brain, or I want to rock, or I love you, That's the really low temperature material. And then the high temperature material is full of nonsensical, run-on sentences and lots of really weird proper nouns and names of things. And so in order to make songs that had a range of emotional sort of feeling, we combined a lot of low temperature and high temperature material into the same songs. And as with the melodies, we didn't take anything as is. We really went through manually and combed through and looked for exceptionally interesting phrases or images or passages or things that spoke to us and felt like they were meaningful to who we are and where we were coming from. The biggest influences on our working method with the text were really kind of like low-tech, anti-technological, really. I mean, we were looking at like William S. Burroughs' cut-up writing methods and the Dadaists. High-tech, low-tech is kind of our operandus. So in order to actually make songs with this giant block of text and this giant pile of melodies, we actually had to take the interesting passages and then place them on top of the melodies that we decided would be the interesting vocal melodies. The problem is the melodies generated by VAE don't have any relationship to the human body, least of all to our human bodies or to our competencies as performers and singers, and they certainly have no relationship to like the internal rhythms of the English language. So a lot of the time we had to kind of break the lyrics on top of the melodies in order to sort of force them into working, and that meant we had to pull apart syllables and pronounce things in really weird ways and do things that were deeply unintuitive and which will certainly lead to a lot of people listening to this music and mishearing lyrics constantly. It's like a Mondegreen maker. So let's take a closer look at some of the lyrics we decided to work with. Here's a passage from a song. I want your phone to my brain. I want you to call my name. I want you to do it too. Oh, won't you come, won't you come, won't you work on my head, be my number 9. To be alive, to be with you, like a weed. I can feel it in my head, like a dog in bed. I know. So, speaking as someone who normally writes songs that have like a relationship to meaning or cadence, or are personal in some way, singing these kinds of lyrics really forced me to step outside of my embodied habits and develop a relationship to words first as sounds, and then to kind of grow to love and appreciate the meaning that comes after sound. This is pretty liberating. But the lyrics also contain these really strong, strange images that I would never have written, like, I can feel it in my head like a dog in bed. I mean, what a phrase. It has the form of idiomatic English, but the meaning is completely sideways. And yet, it also still kind of means something, because I think we can all easily imagine a feeling that's as warm and willful and present as a dog that's sneaking into bed at night. And that's the magic of working with this stuff. It really opens you up to new ways of thinking about language, of thinking about music, and of thinking of the interplay between those two things. Okay, so let's hear how these lyrics fit on that melody that I just played you, which we determined at the outset would be a good vocal melody.
I want your phone to my brain. I want you to call my name. I want you to do it too. Oh, won't you come, won't you come, won't you work on my head? Be my number 9, to be alive, to be with you like a weed. I can feel it in my head like a dog in bed. And
Thanks. So one of the most interesting and challenging things of working in this way is actually performing the generative material. Like I said earlier, it's often far beyond our competencies. And sometimes the things that sound simple, I mean, this sounds simple, but it's like sideways from the embodied patterns of play, of singing and performance that we're accustomed to. And I can't tell you how many times we were in the studio just trying to nail like some seemingly simple guitar line, but just because it was slightly different than what we were accustomed to doing, it was impossible to do. And that happened a lot. And it was kind of brain-breakingly difficult in many moments, but at the same time, it often forcibly pushed us outside of our comfort zone, pushed us outside of sort of the patterns that we had fallen into, and often patterns we hadn't even perceived were there to begin with, and forced us to play differently and think differently about how we work. Okay, finally I'm going to play you the first minute of the final song with everything together. So you'll hear the first chorus, which has its own like amazing made-up idiom, and then you'll hear the verse I played you before. So again, melodically, everything you'll hear was generated by the Music VAE model, but the performance, arrangement, production, structure, everything else is ours. And this is like kind of what we see as a collaborative strategy. It's not so much about like as an artist being replaced by machine learning, but rather being given the opportunity to focus our energies in different directions and in different places than we're accustomed to. It's not about revoking control at all. It's not about letting go. It's about holding on and letting the process change you. You can pump it, maybe. This is just one way of working with machine learning to make music, and it's not even like really, the right way. I don't think there's countless of approaches, and many of them are going to be far more technical. Again, we are getting in where we fit in. We are engaging at the level that we know how. But beyond the challenges that it faces, like that it brings to workflow, because it's definitely not intuitive or fun to like pull up the Colab notebook in the browser in the studio, the challenges are really satisfying and exciting because they're the kinds of challenges that make you stop and consider what you're actually doing. And for us, the process has been infuriating at times, but ultimately really deeply gratifying. And the best way I can describe it is that it feels like you're doing a puzzle, and then when you're done, the puzzle is not, the picture on the puzzle is not what's on the box, but who cares, because who cares what's on the box? Okay, there's more to talk about, we can talk about it during the panel. Thank you.
That was awesome. Cool. Yeah, you can sit here. So we're really grateful to Yacht for coming to us so early in this process because you can see that a lot of our tools, through your story, were just sort of in their early stages, and we got a lot of really useful feedback about how an artist would actually want to interact with different types of things in machine learning. And this next project we're going to introduce, I feel, sort of shows how we've sort of come along this process to now make these tools available to the point where someone can just do a project in a shorter amount of time. And so we've done a project with the Flaming Lips that's very specifically for that's very specifically for I/O. And so we're going to give you a sneak peek of things that are going to be happening for the concert tonight. And then we're going to have a nice discussion panel here talking about all these things. So we'll play a video.
One more.
Anytime that the Flaming Lips have stumbled upon a new little instrument, it's changed what we created.
The goal of the Magenta team is to really explore the role of machine learning in creativity in the creative process to enable people to express themselves in new ways. Piano Genie is the great work of an intern we had, Chris Donahue. He designed an algorithm to be able to take piano playing and try to reproduce the piano playing, only hitting a couple buttons on a controller. And it naturally comes out sounding a lot more like a professional piano player.
One of the things that we really focus on that's very different from a lot of other machine learning projects is how can we let people manipulate these algorithms?
It's been really exciting collaborating with the Flaming Lips because they're so creative in their approach to music that we just sort of showed them everything we have. We're hoping to create a new experience where the audience can co-create music with the band in real time using Piano Genie.
So we made an intelligent musical instrument and melody creator out of fruit with Google. When I played the fruit, I'm touching it, and I didn't know exactly what it was going to do every time.
Each one is announcing what it is.
Banana, green apple.
Maybe it's in the key of G. So we worked with Google AI, and they sent us the software called Piano Genie. You hit a note, and it automatically plays music.
In the more that we play with it, the more it understands what it's playing against and who it's playing with.
So you play a different rhythm or a different note, and this goes on and on. So it actually wrote a melody that we would not have written.
Instead of the machine doing it for you, you're kind of encouraging the machine to do something. It's kind of cool. 1, 2, 3. If you're a banana, that's pretty good for a banana.
All right, am I working? There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, there you are.
All right.
So this is Wayne Coyne.
Hello, everybody.
Yes. Hello. So we wanted to start this discussion because there's obviously there's a lot of hype about machine learning and artificial intelligence, and when you come to one of these projects, there can be a lot of preconceptions about what it is that's going to be like to interact with these things. So maybe Claire, I want to start with you, just sort of talking about how were those preconceptions met, or what was different than what you expected?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not ashamed to say that at the outset we thought we would just push a button and make songs. We thought that's where we were at in terms of the technological development of AI. I mean, that's maybe what the hype of the mainstream makes us believe, that it's going to come for our jobs in this way that's so visceral. But we really thought we could sort of put all of our songs into a machine, and then it would give us a new Yacht song. And we found out very quickly, of course, that that's not at all where we're at, which was really exciting because it meant that we got to be the humans in the loop, and we got to have way more control over the process than we initially believed we would. I mean, initially we thought it would be about committing to whatever the machine made, and then we would have to play it and perform it and make it our own. But actually, we got to kind of co-create with the models, and we had to take a much stronger hand, and we had to come up with rule sets and systems and processes that were uniquely our own, so that even if you gave the same, we gave other musicians, or really anyone in this room, the exact same lyrics generated machine output and the same notation data, we'd all make different records, because it's really about the personal interpretation of what to do with all this source material. So I was pleasantly surprised at the lack of sophistication, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Wayne, does that vibe with your experience?
I would say, our thing had so much momentum going. And I feel like I have too many questions, I have questions even to ask you. What was the word? Okay, so there's the light thing that's in Los Angeles, right?
Triforium, yeah.
Yeah, so what's the word it says?
Polyphenoptic. I know, I figured you'd like that.
What is that? I mean, is that a real word?
It's phonoptic. It's not a real, it's a word.
Okay.
In the sense that any word is a word.
But it's a made-up word.
Every word is a made-up word.
I was like, what? Well, that's true. So, from my experience, I didn't really have any idea what we were going to do. I think we were deciding what we were going to do based on what we did 5 minutes ago. Everything that we've done starts to accelerate with ideas and energy and momentum. And I think that's why you guys wanted the Flaming Lips, because it's they're going to do something, And you talked about, these self-imposed rules or whatever. And I think we were lucky that the only rule we had is you have to do it now. You have to get going, And I love that. I think that, a lot of times you do with time, you second guess, what is this? Is this any good? And you go back and redo it. And sometimes with that energy of do it, you make decisions and you're 20 decisions in before you've had time to be too insecure about it or whatever. So I think the more that, and we're very lucky because we had you guys sitting there every step of the way. If something didn't work, we just blamed you and said, you got to fix this thing, And to me, that's always the intimidating part of a new thing. We have a brand new Volvo, and I don't quite know how to turn on the serious stations in the car yet. You're driving, you're trying not to kill anybody, and then you're trying to get to the last Beatles station that you were on. And so I always get intimidated that I'm going to just turn the car off or something. So I'm like, if I don't know how it works, I'm always afraid. But having you guys there, sort of showing us how it worked, and then we kind of immediately want to go, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. And I think that's not a luxury that very many people have, but I felt like that encouraged us to be, as absurd as you guys, thankfully allowed us to be. I mean, the idea that this quickly went from there's a piano there with this little device, and then 30 seconds later, there's a bowl of fruit there, and Steven's playing this amazing classical kind of piece on using bananas and strawberries and oranges, And when you're there and all that's happening, it's exhilarating. And I think, for someone like me, that idea that we're not playing it on a keyboard, we're not playing it on a guitar, we're playing it on fruit, just takes it into this other realm. I mean, and so some people say, well, that's what children would do. They'd say, yeah, can I play musical notes on an orange or a strawberry? And I'd be like, yeah.
Yeah, so even though there was, we were there, right? So we could help get around sort of any issues you came across. There is some level of unpredictability to these algorithms, right?
Yeah.
And I think you guys have both experienced that in your work. So I'm curious to hear, maybe starting with Claire from your process, because there was parts of things that you were giving up some agency to, right? Like you were letting it write lyrics for you, but in your case, you're going to be doing a live performance where you don't know exactly what it's going to play. So how do you, even though you're giving up a little bit of this agency, how do you keep control and make sure that your artistic vision is still shining through on top of this?
Yeah, I think ultimately nothing goes out into the world with our name on it that hasn't been fussed over for months on the computer in our living room. We have the ultimate agency, and the fact that we're even doing the project to begin with is like a kind of aesthetic provocation that we've decided we want to do. But at the same time, I don't know. I think what's being replaced here in terms of our process is the initial jam, the initial sound gathering, the initial filling up the notebooks with lyrics ideas, the sort of generative moment. And instead of jamming in a room with each other, we're jamming in a server with a model, right? And what we end up with is a mass of source material to work with. And in my mind, that's when the work begins. That's when the creative work begins. And I'm a writer too, so I believe strongly that writing is editing. What you put on the page in the very beginning is just this thing that happens in a fugue state that's a total mess, and then it's useless until you actually do something with it. And I think it's the same thing. A notebook full of lyrics ideas isn't a song. A jam you did in the studio that sounded really cool in the moment, isn't a song. What you do with those things, how you bring them together, how you structure them, how you arrange them, produce them, perform them, commit to them, and then perform them for possibly years to come, that's the song.
Yep.
And so I don't really feel that much we gave up anything, really. We just sort of sped up or changed the nature of the process. I don't even think it was faster. Actually, I think it was slower. I think it took way longer to manually annotate our back catalog into MIDI and come up with a corpus of 2 million words of things that we thought would be the same things that were kicking around in our head on some level. I think it was actually more tedious in many ways. So yeah, it's you decide what you give up, but you also really determine the parameters of how you do it, and then what you do with it afterwards is what really matters.
And that was more in a compositional process, where you have to deal with how much are you controlling and how much are you editing. And so Wayne, with this thing that's more of a performance, right? You have this different interaction where it's how much are you controlling what's happening and how much is there a chance element in the performance?
Right. I mean, the way we looked at it, and even the way we look at it, even you guys are you know, we're accepting that we're bringing a collaborator in. You know what I mean? Which we do that all the time, and sometimes you regret it. You know, we had a like a digital trumpet part on a song once. And we thought it was great and whatever, and we had a trumpet player come to the studio, and we said, yeah, just play whatever you want or whatever, you know. And little by little, you know, we didn't like what he played, or, you know, for whatever reason. Well, it wasn't his fault. It was, we were stuck on a certain idea. And by the end of it, we said, well, can you play exactly what we played, only play it on a real trumpet? And after he left, we actually didn't even use his trumpet, you know. But, you know, all this is a process of saying, you know, do I like this thing? How much do I care about it? How much does it matter to me? And you go through all these different reasons, and there's no real reason. You know, your reason at the end of it is like, I just like it. I don't have any deep meaning to it. And so for us, I mean, we went into it knowing we want to do this collaboration, and unlike the trumpet player, you know, everything that we would touch, and I said this to you guys there, you know, we were starting with sounds that I really liked to begin with, and a lot of times I'll start to hear the sounds and I'm already starting to think of a song. You know, I'm like, hey, play that again. You know, you're going off on things, and I'm like, wait, go back to this other sound. So to me, that's really all I'm ever doing. You know, it's sparking something that's saying, oh, well, I can turn that into a song. I already know what I want to sing to that or whatever, you know. And knowing that we're going to turn it into something that we have to perform, we never consider that when we're thinking of what it's going to be. Yeah, to me, those are just two different worlds, you know.
Yeah.
And knowing that we want the audience to be part of it, I think as we went, our initial surge of an idea quickly turned into a way to make that something that we thought, when we're there with an audience and they're doing this thing with us, they'll understand their contribution to the thing. We talked about interactive things where you're not quite sure what you're doing to make it go. You know, you
Right.
walk into a lot of things where you sort of feel like you're supposed to move your arm or stand in a certain place and it does something, but you can't quite tell what it's doing. And I think we've gone to a great effort to say, when this thing is happening, good, bad, indifferent, you know you contributed to its growing, its dying, its boredom, its excitement. You contributed to it, which to me is already, that's what we want. Because to me, that's where the fun is. That's where the energy comes from. We're not really saying we're going to create the greatest piece of music ever. We might, but to me, that's not what concerts or anything is. We're all going to participate in this thing. We're going to create our own energy, create our own time, our own happening.
Yeah. And so you mentioned like there's some unpredictability, right, in the interaction with this thing. And like a lot of music and technology has always co-evolved with that unpredictability. Like guitar amplifiers weren't meant to distort, but then people turned them up and they found this sounds great, you know. Or the 808, you know, drum was originally supposed to be an accurate reproduction of a drum set, which it's not, but man, it sounds really good in electronic and hip hop music.
For sure, yeah.
So with these new technologies, machine learning, like Claire, I don't know, did you have any experiences where they failed in ways that, you know, maybe that the failure was the interesting aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about the failure. The minute it's perfect is when I stop being interested, I think those moments where, you know, the melodic information deviates from anything a human being would do or perform, or those moments where a tool doesn't meet your expectations of what it's supposed to do, but it does something completely different, that's more interesting, like the 808, or the NSynth, by the way, which is an amazing neural synthesizer that Google makes. But yeah, those are the moments where I think that's the most interesting output, because it allows you to like determine what your own taste is sometimes. I mean, I think that taste is often a response to something rather than something that's coming directly from you. You know, you see something, you're like, I like it, I don't like
Yep.
it. And that's how you kind of determine who you are, what you want to be doing, how you want to express yourself. And I think it's very interesting and helpful to have this sort of semi-neutral, I mean, I know saying that AI is neutral is kind of a loaded thing, but semi-neutral other party in the room that is not one of your bandmates that proposes an idea, and we can all agree with it, we can all disagree with it. No one's feelings are hurt if we dispense with that idea because it didn't come from any of us. We can fall in love with it and move forward with it as a group or not. And we can determine, you know, who we are in terms of our relationship to each other by agreeing or disagreeing on some other generated output. But I mean, the NSynth, for example, is kind of like the 808 in many ways because it's this tool that is supposed to do one thing. It's supposed to sort of split the difference between lots of different sounds using latent space. And it kind of, in my opinion, sort of fails at that. I mean, it doesn't convincingly split the difference between a car horn and a flute because the sort of sample rate is so low that it ends up sounding kind of reedy and wonky and weird. And initially, we thought that that was like we thought that was a failure. We thought it was not interesting. It wasn't until we started thinking about it like the 808 where we realized that it was a tool with its own aesthetic, its own kind of weird, wonky, reedy sound, that it became really interesting to us. And now it's a huge part of our record because it is, again, one of these objects that's both high-tech and low-tech at the same time. And it sounds really lo-fi, but it takes like millions of dollars of machine learning research to make that sound. That juxtaposition is pretty fascinating to us.
Yep.
So I think, unfortunately, we're out of time, but let's thank Claire and Wayne for coming.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
And they're both playing tonight, so check out the show.